Welcome to the Third Apron Salarycast. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst, and this is another mock-off season where I'm going to do some hypothetical moves, mainly for fun, but also to show how teams can accomplish goals within the salary cap rules. And this one's on the Minnesota Timberwolves. I've already covered them extensively. I had a podcast with Dane Moore on to discuss their offseason, and I also went over their salary cap dynamics on the Third Apron newsletter. I put the links in the description for both of them. I highly suggest you check them out for a little more context on what I'm about to talk about. So the Wolves have had some of the most aggressive and memorable off seasons in the past recent years. They went and traded 5 first-round picks to get Rudy Gobert in 2022, and last summer they traded Karl Anthony Towns, surprisingly, on the eve of training camp for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo and a first-round pick. And now they'll have a similar chance to make another splash this summer if they go out and trade for Kevin Durant. So that's going to be one of the scenarios I explore. But first, I want to go over their payroll situation and show how they could potentially retain all their top guys, mainly Julius Randle and Naz Reid, who have player options, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who is their top free agent. So they currently have 14 players under contract. If you include those pending player options, I've got them with that first round pick that they have via the Pistons. And they've got a couple non-guaranteed players, couple pending team options over here. And when you put them all together, they've got $196 million payroll. That puts them a little bit over the luxury tax line, about $8.2 million above the threshold. And that would give them a pretty small $8.8 million luxury tax penalty. So as far as their luxury tax situation, last year they paid a whopping $90 million penalty, even after doing the Towns trade. And now this year, they have the same basic roster for the most part. They're only going to be paying like just under $10 million if they just run this team back the way it currently is constructed. Why is that? Mainly Rudy Gobert. He was going to have a big $46.6 million salary this upcoming season. He declined it and signed a long-term extension that lowered his first-year salary by 25%. So got down to $35 million. And those savings make a substantial difference in the Wolves having a pretty small tax penalty right now with the current team currently constructed. That helped the salary cap rising by 10%, helped them as well. And also the new luxury tax system is about to kick in, where teams that are in like the first 2 luxury tax levels, like pretty low within 11 million of above the tax, they pay like almost just dollar for dollar penalty. So the deeper that they go, then you can start to see their tax penalty increase a little bit. I'll get into what potential contracts for these players can look like if they opt out, but I wouldn't expect their payroll to deviate too much. It could go up a little bit, especially if they do bring back Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I would expect that at the most, though, to probably get to the second apron, that $208 million, $207.8 million line. I get the feeling that might be the line that they want to follow. Last year, they finished over the second apron. The penalty was getting their 2032 draft pick frozen, so they can't trade it. But the other thing, more probably relevant to them, is that as they get closer to the second apron, their luxury tax payment starts to get a lot more expensive. So ideally, the goal for them would be to bring back all these guys and get Nickeil Alexander-Walker back at a number that, okay, maybe they could go over the second apron a little bit, but hopefully keeps them at that level, not only to keep their expenses controlled, but also to retain trade flexibility. Because as a team above the first apron, they already cannot do sign-in trades. They can't sign and trade for free agents. They can't have the full mid-level exception. They would have the smaller taxpayer amount versus 5.7 million. But also they cannot take back more salaries than they're sending out in a trade. Whoever they're bringing in, they got to send out at least 100% of those salaries out. But before we get to any transactions, let's take a look at some of their pending player options and see what running it back could look like, see what kind of contracts that they could be looking at. So Julius Randle, he's got that $31 million player option. And if he picks it up, he can extend for a maximum of 4 years, $194 million. I don't think, despite how well he played this year, he's going to have a market close to that. Right now, there's only one cap space team, which is the Nets, and I don't really anticipate them even pursuing him. So he's probably going to be looking at something a lot lower, something a little more reasonable if he does an extension, or he can potentially decline it and restructure his deal, start his salary at a slightly different amount, and then extend off of that. So here's something else I came up with. So you may have noticed that on the Wolves cap sheet I had earlier, Julius Randle has these unlikely incentives. He's also got some likely incentives already built in for the Wolves making the playoffs this year, and he played enough games to earn it. And those incentives interfere with the Wolves' apron space. Any incentive, whether they have made it or not, it's factored in to how much apron space they have. And I think that it would be a little more efficient for the Wolves if they can change his contract a little bit and just get rid of those incentives. Because just by getting rid of them, they would gain a lot more space below the second apron, which is going to be pretty important in terms of either re-signing everybody or making a trade for a star later. So in this extension, I kept his base roughly the same as his base in this salary. His 31 million, it really starts at like 29.5 million. And then he's got 1.4 million in incentives that boosts it up to 31 million. So I just have him with that same base, 29.5 million. So that replaces this player option, and that saves the Wolves like almost 2 million in apron space. And then he extends off of that. I have him getting 8% raises on the second and third year, which is the maximum allowable. And then with the player option, it's the same salary as the third year. If you're doing an option, it just cannot be less than the previous year. Overall, 4 years, $130 million, $100 million of new money over the next 4 years. So he's making a little bit more than he has before, a little less than a percentage of the cap of his previous deal, but pretty fair in my opinion, given the market forces. But the biggest thing is that Julius Randle isn't losing any money as far as this year. And he's just restructuring his salary to give the Wolves a little bit more apron space right now. Now, Naz Reid. So he's exceeded the value of his current deal by quite a bit. His current contract has him making around mid-level exception type money. But will there be a market for him out there beyond that? Same thing, kind of like Julius Randle. I don't know. As coveted as he is, I'm not sure the Nets are also going to be the team that makes the big offer. Maybe the Pistons want to. They can make an offer with their $17 million in cap space above the mid-level exception. But that also means that they would have to not bring back guys like Schroeder and Malik Beasley to create that cap space. They might be better off operating over the cap because they have as much spending power with that non-taxpayer mid-level exception, plus the ability to re-sign their top free agents. So the only other way Naz Reid could get more that doesn't involve him re-signing or extending with the Wolves would be through a sign and trade. But that's something that the Wolves would need to agree to. So I could see this ending up in an extension, and there's a couple ways that this can go. The first is the opt-in and extend. Maybe you've seen this idea floated around, and that means he would pick up his $15 million player option, and then the Wolves give him a maximum extension off of that. It would start at $21 million and go up to $26 million on the fourth year. Total of $94 million. The other alternative is he opts out and signs an extension that replaces his $15 million player option amount with a $19.6 million salary. This would be a 140% raise off his $13 million salary that he just had in 24-25. This extension would then run up to 4 years, $87.7 million. It would be a little less in value from the opt-in and extend. However, this gets him paid more sooner because you're declining that $15 million and boosting up to just under $20 million. So he gets like a $4 million raise this season. And I would imagine that this is the type of option that Naz Reid will like to go for. As you can see, I put in this date, June 27th through June 30th. That is because the Wolves have a very brief window to give him this exact extension. June 27th would be the 2-year anniversary of the previous extension he signed with the Wolves, which he signed on the eve of 2023 free agency. Once he reaches that anniversary date, he will have between June 27th through June 30th to opt out and do this exact extension. Otherwise, if you get the free agency, he's either going to have to pick it up or opt out and become a free agent. But again, with the limited suitors out there and the Wolves' potential unwillingness to do a sign and trade, I'm kind of skeptical that they may even have to give him this type of extension now, which kind of leads me to believe that this opt-in and extend, that might be what ends up happening. And lastly, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who may be one of the most coveted players in free agency and one of the more gettable ones from the Wolves. He just made $9 million over the past 2 years, one of the biggest bargains in the league, and he is looking at a substantial raise. Just how big of a raise, I'm still not sure. Many around the league in the media are penciling him in as a full non-tax pyramid level exception guy. That would start at 14.1 million, total up to 4 years, 60.6 million. Now, there are about 10 teams right now, excluding the Wolves, that have the means to offer him that outright, also without exceeding the tax or some relevant apron levels to them. And I don't know if the full mid-level exception will be available to him. Maybe he could get the full amount, but it wouldn't be the full 4 years, or maybe he could get 4 years, but it wouldn't be the full amount. And that's mainly because we haven't seen a player get that last year. D'Anthony Melton was the only player to get the full starting amount, whatever that amount was last year, and that was just a 1-year deal. So as I thought about it, I recalled how last year you had Derrick Jones Jr. and Najee Marshall both get 3-year, $27 million deals with the Clippers and Mavs, respectively. Maybe that's kind of the sub-mid-level type offer that Nickeil Alexander ends up getting. So when adjusting for the salary cap rising, it would be more like 3 for 34 now in this upcoming free agency. Maybe he does end up getting the full mid-level exception. Maybe I'm wrong. But as I'm looking through the market and seeing what's out there, I could see him getting something a little closer to this. I would guess that if the Wolves can re-sign him to this amount that I laid out, the Wolves probably would like to bring him back, especially if it does keep their expenses controlled and below the second apron. If it starts to get substantially higher, closer to the mid-level exception, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't bring him back. And that's mainly because they already have a couple guys that they're very excited about to put in the rotation more. They played a lot of Terrence Shannon Jr. and Jalen Clark last year, especially in the playoffs. Shannon got a lot of minutes in the playoffs off the bench. I get the feeling that internally they might be prepared to let Alexander Walker leave, especially if the money gets too high, and because they're kind of eager to play some of their young guys a little more. So here's my, I suppose, pipe dream of how I could see the Wolves bringing back all of Julius Randle, Naz Reid, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker under the structures that I laid out and keep their costs pretty controlled and right below the second apron. So I've got Randle and Alexander Walker with those projections I laid out. I've got Naz Reid opting in. I had them decline the option of Josh Minot because, there's a roster crunch going on. I also had them decline Luka Garza, but I had them re-sign him on a 1-year minimum, so it's a little less money on their cap sheet, but Luka Garza actually makes a little bit more money because his minimum is going to be higher than what his team option would be. And I have them signing the 31st overall pick, which would probably get the 2-year minimum salary, second round picks that high usually get salaries that high nowadays. And yeah, that gets them with a $34 million penalty, which is substantially lower than that $90 million amount that they paid last year. And they're just below the second apron where they have enough flexibility to do couple more moves down the line. Maybe they got to cut somebody. They could cut Leonard Miller if needed. He's non-guaranteed. If they need a little bit more flexibility to do some end of bench moves. But also they have a little bit of flexibility later to do a consolidation trade down the line. If they need to aggregate some players to get a potential star, they have a little bit more flexibility to do that than if they were above the second apron. They could get above the second apron and do an aggregation trade, but as long as they finish below the second apron, because once they aggregate salaries in a trade to get someone more expensive, that hard caps them to the second apron. All right, and one last thing before I get into my Kevin Durant trade, I just want to show their draft pick situation, mainly because they can't trade any. They already traded all their draft picks in odd numbered years through 2029 in that trade to the Jazz to get Rudy Gobert. And they already traded their 2031 first to the Spurs last offseason to get the 8th overall pick to select Rob Dillingham. They cannot trade their 2032 pick anyways. One, because of the stepping rule prohibits teams from trading picks in consecutive years. So because of that, they cannot trade 26, 28, and 2030. But even without that, they cannot trade their 2032 because, as I explained earlier, it is frozen. So all they could do is trade the 17th overall selection, and that would only be allowed once the selection is made. So anytime on draft night or after. All right, now let's get to the actual trade. Kevin Durant to the Wolves. They've been linked to him in recent weeks. It's been reported that they made an offer for him at the trade deadline, which probably included Julius Randle and either Naz Reid or Dante DiVincenzo. At this stage in his career, Durant has a lot of control of where he wants to go, especially with only 1 year left on his deal. I think the Wolves should be able to acquire him if he makes them one of his top preferences, and it shouldn't cost them too much. As I mentioned just now, they can't trade any draft picks, and I'm not too sure the market for Durant is going to be that strong where teams are going to give up anything close to what the Suns originally gave up to get him. So I'm going to show you the framework. I didn't feel like doing a big multi-team trade, which is what this would end up having to play out, because I'm involving Nickeil Alexander-Walker in a sign and trade, which means he cannot go to the Suns because they're over the first apron. There's a lot of different things that I'm about to explain, so try to bear with me as I get through it. So here, first of all, like with some of my other mock trade deadline, mock off seasons, I just like to show what is required from the team's perspective, both in terms of value, but mainly the salary matching to get a trade done. So Kevin Durant's got this $54.7 million salary. The expanded trade exception, which teams below the first apron can use, would allow them to send a minimum of $43.6 million to match for Durant. However, if the Wolves structured the trade this way, they would be hard capped to the first apron, which right now they're projected to be above and probably a lot closer to the second apron. This is not how the Wolves would structure this trade. Most likely, if they have the opportunity to trade for Durant, they're going to have to do a 100% match of his $54.7 million salary. That would allow them to exceed the first apron, but they'd have to stay below the second apron after, because they don't have a player making this much or more, which means they have to aggregate. They got to combine multiple players to get to that $54.7 million salary and then be able to field a roster below the second apron. So here's how I got it structured. I included Randle and Reid opting into their player options just to make things a little simple. There are ways that they can get an extension and get a slightly higher amount, like the ones I showed earlier, to boost that amount. But just to make things simple, I just have them opting in because I don't think their salary is going to deviate too much next season. And to help get them closer to that $54.7 million, I included both Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Bones Highland via sign and trade. So let me explain Nas' situation first, because there's a thing in the CBA called base year compensation that's in play here. So this $6.3 million, that represents his outgoing salary. Base year compensation is this rule that limits a player's outgoing salary in the sign and trade to either his salary in the previous year, which is just $4.3 million, or 50% of the starting salary in his sign and trade, whichever is greater. So his actual starting salary is double this amount, about $12.6 million. So that's a little more than that projection that I put out. As I mentioned earlier, the Suns cannot acquire him because they're over the first apron, so he would probably go to a third team, maybe a team like the Pistons, the Magic after they get below the first apron, Clippers. It's just a couple of teams I could see looking to bring him in a sign and trade so they could reserve their mid-level exception for another move. And then in exchange, the Suns maybe get a big man. Maybe they just get some picks so they could save a little bit of money. They're already they need to save money. They have like a $500 million roster. I don't feel like doing the full trade. I just want to show what is expected from the Wolves side. I got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He signs a 3-year deal. It would run for like 3 for $40 with that $12.6 million salary. Any sign and trade has to include a player getting a 3-year deal. And then that includes Bones Highland just to get to the last bit. That's his minimum salary. Only the first year needs to be guaranteed. Last year when the Knicks traded for Karl Anthony Towns, they cheated and they included all their two-way guys on that were free agents to get 3-year minimums that went to Charlotte, and that helped them do a 100% match for Towns, helped them stay below the second apron and field the roster. So I've got Bones. He gets that first-year salary, and then the last 2 years, non-guaranteed. Whichever team takes him. Could also apply to some of their other minimum free agents on the Wolves. Could presumably just waive the guy. Wolves probably have to throw in a second-round pick for getting him involved. They have up to 4 second-round picks to trade. You might notice that the pick, I didn't put any salary. That's because while I have the Wolves sending out the pick, partly to help the Suns get a little more value, they also, I also got rid of it to help the Wolves stay below the second apron. However, the salary can't be used for salary matching at least a month until after the contract is signed. So I'm assuming that, they're not going to wait that long and they'll include the pick, so it's not going to count. So with all 4 of these players, they get to that $54.7 million salary, and they can now exceed the first apron, and they are hard capped to the second apron. I hope that wasn't too confusing. So here's the final roster I've got put together. I've got Kevin Durant in for Julius Randle and Naz Reid. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is not resigned. He is elsewhere. I also have them all, declining and re-signing Luka Garza like I did in that other projection. I've got them signing the 31st overall pick, which will likely be the 2-year veteran minimum salary. That's another minimum signing to get the 14 players. And this time I had them keeping Josh Minot, picking up his team option because that salary is slightly less than the minimum over here. So they save a little bit of it. They get a little bit more flexibility towards staying below the second apron. Just under $34 million penalty. And they finish below the second apron, roughly just below $1 million in flexibility. So later on in the season, they can sign a 15th guy. They can they'll have a little bit more flexibility if they need to make some changes later. So this structure, it's more beneficial for the Wolves if they try to inflate the outgoing salary through sign and trading some of their free agents, because otherwise they're going to have to look at trading a guy like Dante DiVincenzo or Mike Conley to get the rest of the money needed to do the 100% match. But here they get Kevin Durant, and they're about 1 man deeper than what would have been required if they send out someone on their roster. And without Nickeil Alexander-Walker here, now they're going to rely a little bit more on Terrence Shannon and Jalen Clark. So if they get Kevin Durant, I feel like this is the roster build that they're going to try to shoot for. And that is my Wolves mock offseason. I hope I covered all the bases in terms of how their offseason can go. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think that is enough to get Kevin Durant? For whatever reason, I just feel like there's not going to be that strong of a package out there for him. Or do you think the Wolves might have to trade some of their young guys like Rob Dillingham? Let me know what you guys think. And make sure you are following me on Twitter and Blue Sky at my name, Yossi Goslin. It's the best time of year to do that. I'm going to be reacting with salary cap analysis as soon as all transactions happen. Make sure you're subscribed to me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, to the Third Apron podcast. And make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter on Substack. And check the link in the description. We still have a couple spots for the Sports Business Classroom program in Summer League in Las Vegas. I've got a link in the description that could tell you all about it.